The following program is brought to you by the Arizona Senior Academy. We sponsor engaging lectures, live concerts, and courses on a wide range of topics. We hope that you enjoy this presentation.
Today we have Dr. Barbara Eisworth, who is the Executive Director of Refugee Network. She and volunteers work with United Nations refugees and asylum seekers from over 35 ethnic groups in the Southern Arizona community. These activities foster a stronger, more connected community for those who have been dislocated from their own communities. Barbara will explain how the organization helps refugees develop the tools, knowledge, and support needed to thrive. IRN volunteers and refugees work to reduce local food waste, educate the public, strengthen the local food system, and increase food security. In the process, educational pathways and networks of trust are built and sustained. So let's welcome Barbara from IRN.
My name is Barbara Eisworth. It's a delight to be here. We're always interested in bringing on people to support our mission, but most of all to educate and get people involved in building community with welcoming United Nations refugees. Iskashita Refugee Network is a local nonprofit started in 2003 as an additional way to welcome refugees. And in this particular case, the first ethnic group, we worked with Somali Bantu, and that word means working cooperatively together. They were so joyful to have found the perfect word to describe what they felt about the work that we were doing together in Tucson. Because the news and our politicians, globally, nationally, locally, no longer respect the legal term that it is, refugee, as defined by the UN Convention of 1951 and the US Refugee Act of 1980. Refugee is a legal term, not to be interchanged with immigrant or migrant or asylum seeker, or those are different terms. And it's defined as such. The person has left their country of origin and is unable or unwilling to return due to a past persecution or a fear of persecution for one of 5 reasons: race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership to a specific social group. So what does that not mean? What does that not include? So an economic refugee is not a refugee at all, but an economic migrant or immigrant. You don't choose to be a refugee. You're
Right.
fleeing for your life. Your life is in peril, that of your family. The other big one that is used is climate refugee. We have other categories that help protect those types of migrants, and that would be temporary protective status, such as victims from tornadoes and hurricanes and so forth. With the definition that we have today, that does not include those folks. So it has to be one of these 5 reasons. The other thing that I shortcut try to explain to people is a refugee arrives to the United States of America on an airplane. There's no other way to arrive. There's no exception to that rule. So that can just limit your scope to exactly who we're talking about here. We're going to talk about other categories as well. IDP is the internally displaced person. Asylum seeker is someone who was forced to flee their country, but didn't go through the proper channels or didn't have the opportunity to go through the proper channels. Asylum seekers enter the country and they claim for asylum inside the United States. You cannot claim asylum outside of the United States under these definitions, and you don't become an asylee or refugee until that has been granted. Just to give you a little bit of statistics here, 5.8 million people in need of international protection, 6,000 million under the Palestinian crisis as we know today so well, 6.9 million asylum seekers, 31.6 million refugees under UNHCR's mandate, those 5 reasons that I just mentioned. So that's a whole lot of people globally, and those statistics will become more devastating as we move on with characteristics globally. These are the countries in the US arrivals. Congo's still pretty high. Some of those numbers are fluctuation. And as of with the new administration, all of these will be changing dramatically. Right now it's at 0. So refugee resettlement is one possible solution, but the first 2 solutions that are attempted for durable solutions for refugees that have fled their country, refugee camps are set up in neighboring countries, is voluntary repatriation. So the idea originally was that peace would come to those countries and they could repatriate to their country of origin. Around the world, that has happened more and more, but that's not enough to de-escalate the situations. And it doesn't always happen for a country. I'll use Bhutan as a country where that never happened after 20 to 24 years of being in refugee camps. There are very few people that were repatriated to the country. The second durable solution is integration to the country of origin, the first country of asylum, so neighboring countries. That becomes challenging when so many, if there's political conflict or civil conflict for the surrounding countries, that becomes very difficult to be able to absorb the numbers. I was in a refugee camp in Kenya, which is bordered by Uganda and Sudan and Somalia, and those 3 countries were pouring in, walking or otherwise, and then 10 other countries. So that takes a lot to be able to absorb economically. The third resettlement solution is to repatriate to a third country. So what percentage of the world's population are resettled? It's less than 1%. We think it's because we hear about this in the news all the time, but it's really a small percentage of the world's refugee population being able to go to a third country. Of those, of the countries that accept refugees, there's probably 30 to 40 countries that accept refugees. So we're not the only one. And there's lots that have a much higher per their population, much higher percentage than the United States. I remember, and this was a few years ago, Lebanon, 1 out of every 4 people during the height of the Syrian crisis was 1 in 4 people were a refugee in Lebanon. So our small percentage here, but the US by sheer numbers takes more than other countries in the world. What happens is we're warehousing people in refugee camps or in neighboring countries where, so there's refugees in refugee camps, and then we call urban refugees that are living under the radar in neighboring countries where they can be safer. So here's the shocking fact, which you never hear about in the news, but true to till today, the global average stay in a refugee camp is 17 years. So more recently, I've been finding the Bhutanese were 18 to 22 years, but more recently, I'm seeing people resettled to Tucson that have been in a refugee camp for 20 years or 23 years, sitting there sharing a meal. And I asked a young man, he's all alone. I said, how long were you in the refugee camp? Where were you? Tanzania. Where are you originally from? Rwanda. How long were you in the refugee camp? He said, 20 years. And I went, 20 years? How old are you? 23. So since he was a baby, and just last month, I asked a man and his wife, asking about their family of 2 little kids. I said, how long were you in the refugee camp? He said, 28 years. I said, how old are you? And he said 28. So he wasn't born there, but he came as an infant. So 17 is the average. There's lots of organizations in Tucson. It takes a village to support refugees. And Tucson and Arizona has been one of the most welcoming communities and states in the last 22 years that I've been doing this. I wanted to reassure you of the vetting processes, because in 2016, you might have remembered there was a lot of discussion about vetting. And I assure you that refugees are vetted as immigrants to the US are the most vetted out of any other categories out there, because there's all of these government agencies. The normal processing time is 2 to 3 years for background checks and medical processing, now using biometrics. So that we've always been assured of, that we're not bringing in, and countries are not emptying their prisons and they're not emptying their asylums. But we have something very proud to be the biggest receiver of refugees, because this is humanitarian relief. This is towards global peace. If there's a hot spot in the world and there's war in the world, we're not separate. We are now this global community. Then we should, for the good and the bad and the ugly, we should be part of that community looking for solutions. And some countries choose refugee populations based on their ability to become self-sufficient in 90 days or less, or they have a path through education. So the Scandinavian countries put people through school, not just high school, but then on to trade schools and on to universities, so that they can reach their fullest potential. We take mothers, not to get too graphic, but the realities are mothers who have been weaponized through their conflict as rape victims and have 7 children, can't return to their country because of the sexual violence against them. They're not going to be self-sufficient in 1 generation. But we don't say, we're not going to give relief to you because you're not going to make us economically prosperous in 1 generation. I used to be very proud of that fact, that lots of countries pick and choose which populations. And I thought there was enough wealth in this country that we could show that kind of humanitarian relief to the rest of the world. Same as other legal residents in the US, they're required to get their green card after 12 months of being here. This is something that concerns me today because of restrictive access to immigration services. We're not up to date on all of our green cards, but that could be used against us here in the near future. But they have a direct path to citizenship. They have a direct, immediate right to work. And some people are working within just weeks of arriving here after being through so much. So another point of worrisome to me, these are the numbers, just refugees. Each year, the quota is set by the State Department and the president. And those are based on what hotspots are in the world and who our allies are, and a lot of other factors in there. But the president does have a great deal of influence. It's not an act of Congress that chooses these ceilings. We've never reached our ceilings, except there's 1 year in there. Often we fall well below the quotas because of other challenging circumstances. Sometimes it's security issues, sometimes it's processing times. But just to give you an idea, in 2016, the numbers dropped precipitously because of the Muslim ban. In 2017, they dropped further. In 2018, they dropped further. And so this administration has stopped all refugee resettlement for 6 months, starting January 27th. But not only that, he's decided that he would not honor the monies that went along with refugee resettlement to the agencies that in 49 states have been resettling refugees from November, December, and January. So those organizations are in serious financial trouble right now because he just yanked the way that they are able to operate the services that they have. So we're not sure what's going to happen next. So asylum seekers and asylees. So Sometimes people are fleeing their countries. They don't always stop. And if there might not be the systems in place that are found in Kenya and Tanzania and Nepal, had 7 refugee camps with all the refugees there. And so they are fleeing for their lives, but have not gone through that vetting process and not gone through the interview process for a variety of reasons. And so there's 2 types of asylum seeking. There's asylum seekers that claim asylum at the border, and those are called defensive cases. And then asylum seekers that have the economic means or ways to get to the United States through a different visa and arrive on an airplane or some other means. And those are called affirmative cases. Once asylees and refugees then have that same path to citizenship. So coming in with a visa, so it could be a student visa, it could be a tourist visa. There's a variety of other visas that fall into that category. But once you have come in contact with the Border Patrol or any kind of law enforcement at the border of the country, you are then in a defensive case. And their cases are much harder to prove because you have to have evidence for all of these cases. And not everybody is able to have all of their evidence with them on their persons, or they've lost the evidence in the travel. Stark reality here, disregarding of things that you might have heard. There's not thousands of dollars going to asylum seekers anywhere. They do not receive government benefits. They do not qualify for government benefits. And in the state of Arizona, there's no one nonprofit that has services for asylum seekers. There's places that help with immigration services. There are places that you're all familiar with. Casa Elites was a temporary stay to move on to a different state. 98% of those asylum seekers moved on to another state. They really are without assistance unless they have a family member, but so many do not. Once they get their work authorization, they have the right to work, and so they have no way of supporting themselves. That's where Ishkashita comes in. So we used to do airport welcomes. We don't do that anymore, but the 5 top refugee resettlement countries for Arizona, Democratic Republic of Congo. There are 2 Congos out there, Syria, Afghanistan, Burma, and Somalia. We haven't seen Somali refugees in decades, but they just started coming 2023 and 24. Here are the 3 resettlement agencies. You might have heard that Jewish Family Children Services was back in the refugee resettlement game in 2021 to 2023 with the Afghanistan crisis. They stayed open for about 2 years, and that was in late 2024. They closed their doors to refugee resettlement. Like Lutheran and Catholic Community Services has many services for the community, but their resettlement closed. So these are the 3 agencies in town today, and they've been pretty consistent over the last 2 decades. But to give you an idea of the shoestring that they're on, and they get for each refugee they resettle, they get $2,425 to resettle each refugee. That's children and adults alike. And so that's arriving at the airport, getting people set up with their first medical appointments, their social security cards, their first dental appointment. All that money has to stretch for all of those activities. We give everybody 6 months to get settled in before they owe the International Organization of Migration for their plane tickets to arrive here, mostly on chartered planes. Like good Americans to be, they come with debt built in. But it's the nicest loan that I've ever heard of, and it's very friendly and it's interest free. So they can arrange to make $10 a month towards that loan, and that go on for years. But just so you don't think we're buying plane tickets for the refugees, we're not. It's a loan. They sign for the loan overseas, and we try to keep them paying those loans back. So ideally, you learn English, you support your family, You become literate, if that's the case. You get reaccredited if you've come in with your doctorate or your master's program or with a bachelor's, reaccredited and working well. And if all goes well, you're eligible for citizenship in 5 years. The problem is many families don't become that successful that fast. And these are people we're going to be trying hard to get through their citizenship because they are vulnerable, not as citizens of the United States with just their green cards. Still legally here forever, given the laws today. So just to reiterate, there's a lot that goes into resettling, and our Ishkashita Refugee Network does not resettle refugees. They've asked us to. We said we'd rather support them for longer and without the rules and regulations limiting us of how we can help families. But we're very grateful to work with all three of our partners and help them meet the needs of refugees in the first 3 to 6 months. They get pretty intensive case management and employment services. After that, it severely wanes, and technically they are qualified for services for 5 years. That doesn't happen. The newer refugees take precedence. Learning the English is certainly one of the biggest challenges. Just navigating the city, as explained to us by refugees themselves, is very challenging. And then living on limited incomes and having to decide which of the children shall go back to get their higher degree or go to college while supporting the rest of the family. Very hard choices. Securing employment, 1 job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, night jobs, weekend jobs, to be able to afford Tucson's housing costs today. It's the hardest year that I recall in avoiding eviction and shelterlessness among refugee populations. So I just wanted to highlight that part I was just explaining, the spectrum of education levels, the spectrum of English levels, cultural challenges from village living to urban living. We run the gamut, and we don't want people to assume that they have no skills. Plenty to offer, very hardworking, want to work, want to learn, want to give back to this society, and they come from all walks of life. Ishkashita was an idea of mine when I was working in Malawi doing my dissertation, and I'd come back to Tucson and fruit was falling on the ground. And I remembered the villages that I was in Malawi, Africa, and thought, this is wrong. We could map those resources and we could capture those resources. And that turned into meeting Somali Bantu refugees. And then that turned into a lot of other things in ways that we can help Tucson and involve Tucson in refugee resettlement, but also reducing our carbon footprint in wasting so much food, which is better food than you can buy at the grocery stores. We do this with focusing on education, focusing on sustainability. That's my background in arid lands and environmental sciences. It's been worthwhile for the community because we've accomplished a great deal working with hundreds and hundreds of families each year and introducing Tucsonans to refugees from around the world. So mostly food-focused programming that we've had, so harvesting, gardening, redistribution of food, trying to slow food waste from predominantly people's backyard, but we also do some food rescue. And we do that on our new campus now with our biggest program, which is Refugee Garden Art Program. Greenfields Country Day School, they had a big pool. I said, can we fill the pool with grapefruit so that we could potentially get on national news to bring attention to the level of food waste? Yes, we ate the grapefruit. It was May. Greenfield Country Day School pool is one of the oldest pools. Yeah, it was very cold. So excess food, we do much more than citrus. It is citrus season. I brought some citrus examples, edible tree tours, community events. We're out in the public giving information about what we do for and with refugees. Our volunteers, as well as recipients of our help. We're very proud of that. I'm on the board of directors of the Association of Gleaning Organizations. And when I told them that years ago that, oh, our refugees harvest the fruit and they're the recipients, the whole room went silent. They couldn't believe. So they are part of the solution. They are giving back, and we harvest so much fruit, up to 100,000 pounds a year, and that goes to food banks, shelters, and tribes. As we've expanded what we're harvesting, harvest way more than we can use within refugee resettlement areas. We get hundreds of thousands of pounds without putting all that blood, sweat, and tears in it. But we also go out to field trips. You'll see these massive vines there. That's the controlled environment center on campus. And so we go to greenhouses and hydroponics and educational gardens like Mission Garden. And we do food preservation workshops, food safety, food handling training. A lot of refugees' entry-level jobs are food service. A lot of entry-level jobs are landscaping, and both of which they can gain skill and knowledge and job skills working with Ishkashita. A little bit more about our assistance with asylum seekers. These are some of the countries that we have assisted. And as you can see, lots of them are refugee producing countries. But because the services are so different and the lack of systems in place to assist asylum seekers, that's why it's much more intensive. In 2024, like I said, we saw more eviction, troubleshooting, and shelterless than we ever have before. We help coordinate housing for 13 individuals, which included 6 kids in Safford, Arizona, and Tucson. But like I said, you can see the list of services on the right, much more intense. That's what the refugee resettlement agencies are doing for the refugees, but those services don't exist. As you can tell, I'm very proud of what we've accomplished and love to talk about the impact that we've had in the community. We're always looking for people to join us in this mission. And if you have questions, I'd like to entertain those now.
I applaud you for the work that you do. Thank you. How much are you affected right now by what's going on? Quite a bit, I imagine, because we work for people here and people come across the border. We say seek asylum, and then where do they go? Probably on a bus and get sent right back to Nogales and across the border.
It's been devastating. I was trying to keep hopeful for my staff, for all of our supporters and the faith-based organizations that we work with, but it's way more devastating than I could have fathomed. I've been to a refugee camp. And for us, the United States, land of the great, to turn our backs on the world is devastating. It was devastating before when we just shrunk it, but it's purposely creating this us, them. So refugee resettlement, what happened the last time around was so many of the offices and so many of the programs shrunk or disappeared. Personnel shrunk, disappeared. Whole offices across the US disappeared by the hundreds. That means the community has to step up even more to fill those holes, because it's just going to delay that process of community integration that we so value. And we are always slamming for individuals that don't integrate into the community and don't learn the English fast enough. We can be cold Americans to people. We really want to keep our hearts open to people that have been through so much. They've suffered tremendous amounts of loss, and moving to the US is a drastic change. The economic wealth and growth that they bring into our communities is very significant, and we're told otherwise, but it's the new businesses, the new restaurants are very hardworking people taking jobs that are hard to fill, these entry-level jobs, as people are learning. So I have asylum seekers and refugees that have worked harvesting fruit for food banks 8 hours after getting off a plane. They are giving back to the communities. The resettlement agencies are devastated. There's layoffs all over the place. And it took us a long time to recover when we had closures and losing personnel. It's really hard work. And it takes special people that do that work. These are human beings, if you've met one. So I think the point is to bring it down to a personal level where people can interact and see the value and the humanness of each individual person and families that want nothing but to give back to the community. One of my original Somali Bantu students is a very proud police officer, and another one in the sheriff department. And he can't stand still without doing this. Christina Early is my board chair. Anybody interested in board of director positions? There might be some spots available. The vice chair is from Burundi, comes from a long line of academics and involved in Burundian politics and had to flee his country. And he's always talking about changing the narrative. And I remember the first time that he said to me, "We want trade, not aid." And I went, "Oh, look at there." How to stop thinking about it in old terms or ways that we've been demonizing developing countries, but believe in their ability to help themselves. And how is it that are we helping or are we hurting in ways that we help and ways that we talk about things? That's you do have to talk about things and call things out that are clearly not facts and that are based on some preconceived ideas that don't really flush out when you're looking at the statistics and the facts.
There's a question. What percentage of your funding is derived from federal sources?
Refugee resettlement dollars come out of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. The resettlement agencies get federal dollars, $245 per person. We don't receive any federal funds like that. So we're not affected by those numbers, but that means if refugees can't get services through the resettlement agencies because their funding has just been frozen for 6 months, also devastating is that we get funding from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We have been waiting on a new van for about 20 years. Our harvesting van, our only vehicle, is 22 years old, and we have been waiting on a USDA grant that we got 10 months ago, and now we're afraid that won't come through because that is federal funding. We also are funded by the U.S. Forestry Service. They have held us up as stewards of trees and educating people on the value of shade trees, but fruit trees and beyond. We're not sure about that funding. USDA, US Forestry, EPA, because who educates on recycling and sustainability for people coming into this country? Nobody. That's us. And so we were hoping to get EPA funding, but we are very much affected by the federal funds being threatened for anybody that, and it's hard to not talk about diversity when 60% of the refugees that we work with are African.
I just want to thank you for coming today now when how emotional everything is, how devastating it is. And for you to be here and be able to keep yourself together. It's a really tough time. You did it. Thank you, Barbara, so much for letting us know, because Ishkashita is really how they call, how you create fruit, how you can it, where you go to sell it. It's like pretty incredible.